instead of sending Vance out alongside Trump, or instead of getting him to stake some type of social media presence this week, instead of sending him to certain swing states where the Republicans can establish their own narrative, they've got him stalking Harris and Walz. The choice by the Kamala Harris campaign of Tim Walz as vice presidential nominee is solid. And I'll start with that term solid because you have a record of public service here. And public service is going to be one of the key campaign themes because they're going to juxtapose that with Trump not being a public servant. Tim Walz, high school teacher, high school American football coach, which is really, really important in a way I can't quite get across to British audiences, given what high school football means to communities. And then you have Army National Guard, of course, so the military service. He then uses the GI Bill to go to university. He is a congressman for 12 years in rural Minnesota, but he represents a Republican district. He's only the second Democrat to be reelected from from that district in history. And then he goes on to be a two-term governor in Minnesota with a very high popularity rating. So he has this record which portrays him as almost the all-American guy and puts a lie to the Trump spin, which is that he's a radical leftist, and even what Trump said this morning, that he's a communist. Uh, Instead, he's a centrist, very much representing the interest of agriculture, manufacturing, trade. He does have a record of being progressive on social issues. So voted for Obamacare, big proponent of it. He was a big proponent of food support, including meals for deprived children in schools, uh, legislation against emissions, legislation for LGBT rights, right? But that's not exactly fringe politics. A lot of Americans are behind that. And he also is a gun rights advocate. Now, he's very strongly in favor of regulation of guns, like no semi automatic weapons, no bump stocks to convert guns into machine guns, but he still supports the idea that you can go hunting with guns and that you can have them for personal safety if they're registered. Well, that's a pretty centrist position to say the least. Combine all of that, all of the position on the issues with a demeanor which to me comes across as he's like your dad who is a bit salty at times in what he says. He will push back against someone who he thinks is being mean or being insulting. He'll call out weird dudes when they're being weird. And he'll just be chatty. And I think it's a really interesting counterpoint to Harris, who is that persona, if I was to put it in family terms, of being like your fun older sister or your fun auntie, right? And one of the Tim Walz line last night that grabbed me in the midst of all the craziness that's been American politics was at the rally in Philadelphia introducing him. He just said, turned to Kamala Harris and said, "Thank you for bringing the fun back into politics." And I think what they've gauged is Americans are tired of the insults. They're tired of the attacks. They're tired of the carnage, to use Donald Trump's terms. And Tim Walz is a good, solid choice to kind of bring that across. Harris is not a radical, again, to knock back the Trump spin. She's not even on the left of the party. She's more center left, but she is from California. And, you know, she has that ascent through San Francisco law system and then San Francisco politics. Tim Walz is middle America, down home middle America. And while Josh Shapiro, who's the other favorite, is from the swing state of Pennsylvania, which also, in a sense, has a lot of white working class, has a lot of that idea of a lot of factories and, you know, down to earth people. Shapiro was kind of more of an Obama style politician. He could appear lofty at times. You know, Walz is this kind of, you know, slap you on the shoulder, kind of engaging type of guy from your community, if that makes sense. And as long as we're talking about J.D. Vance, who's on the opposite side, who's from Ohio, well, Walz has already made the contrast. He's made the contrast between the fact that he's an honest, straightforward guy where JD Vance is that weird guy that you wouldn't trust, certainly not with your friends, not with your wife, and not with your daughter, given what he said about childless cat women. I think the Trump campaign made two horrible mistakes around the time that Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden. One of the mistakes was to go in with insult politics against her, to call him Laughing Kamala, which immediately has allowed the Democratic campaign to take the high ground. But the second was naming J.D. Vance. I mean, J.D. Vance is a white guy with a white guy who is the presidential candidate. So it's two white guys. There's no gender balance, there's no racial balance. He's a younger version of Trump, but he's Trump 2.0. So there's no balance in personality as there is with Harris and Walz. In terms of going beyond that, I think the immediate contrast is that Vance has pulled down the Trump campaign. He's actually had negative approval ratings. I think Walz will give the approval ratings a bit of a bump. And then when you pair the two men up, I think you're going to get Walz playing this competent, responsible public servant. And if Vance just simply goes in with these tags, oh, these are radicals, leftists, communists, all the attack lines you get on the Trumpist sites, I don't think those attacks will stick. I think Vance has got to go after Walz's record and say, well, no, he's not actually as friendly as you are because he hasn't been good on the economy, or he hasn't been good on agriculture, or he hasn't been good on gun control. In other words, I think Walz's pick makes the Trump campaign come in on the issues, which is where they have not been comfortable. They're much more comfortable slinging mud at character, but I don't think that works with Walz because J.D. Vance doesn't represent middle America or working class America. And I'm saying this on basis of issues, which is the J.D. Vance of 2016, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, was all about how politicians have betrayed the working class. Fair enough. I mean, I don't agree with everything in the book, but that at least was an honest pitch that he was making. But he remakes himself as a Trumpist. And when he does that, he has a voting record in the Senate, as measured by the labor unions, AFL-CIO, of 0%. Not 20, not 10, 0. He has not voted for a single measure that, in the eyes of the AFL-CIO, benefits the working class. He hasn't voted for a policy that benefits workers in manufacturing, workers in agriculture. He hasn't voted for health care support. He hasn't voted for other kind of income support. And if you don't have that voting record, your shtick on representing the working class has to go on some type of spectacle as opposed to issues. But even here, Vance is in trouble because his reputation in 2016 was the working class had been betrayed by politicians, including Donald Trump, who he called a moron, who he called America's Hitler. We can't quite easily come out and say the working class had been betrayed by Donald Trump in 2024. I think Sarah Palin would actually do quite well in 2024 in spectacle politics, right? I mean, 2008 was just before social media. That was the YouTube campaign. She was lightweight, sure, but I think she got taken apart for different reasons than J.D. Vance is getting taken apart now. I don't think the fault is completely J.D. Vance's. I think the fault's the Trump campaign, right? And let me give you, instead of letting J.D. Vance establish position on issues, instead of letting him establish a position that we are the responsible folks here, they've just put him out there as an attack dog. And he's not I'm using effective in a very loose sense. He's not as effective as an attack dog as Trump because he's not as charismatic as Trump in that perverted way that Trump can be. Let me give you an example here. Instead of sending Vance out alongside Trump, or instead of getting him to stake some type of social media presence this week, instead of sending him to certain swing states where the Republicans can establish their own narrative, they've got him stalking Harris and Walz. Harris and Walz are going to 7 battleground states, starting with Wisconsin and Michigan today. Guess who else is in Wisconsin and Michigan today? J.D. Vance. And it looks a bit creepy, to be honest with you, that J.D. Vance is just simply going to the same states they are and say, boo, they're terrible, boo, look at that. The worst thing about it is it makes the Trump campaign and Vance look reactive. Trump's success has been by being a politician who grabbed the news cycle, who created, it might be a bizarre narrative, a false narrative, a destructive narrative, but that narrative led the headlines for 24, 48 hours, and then he would do it again. Since Harris replaced Biden, the Trump campaign, including Trump himself with all his tweets, all his crazy statements, have not grabbed the news cycle. And if you just send JD Vance out to stalk Harris and Walz, you're not going to get the news cycle because the news cycle is going to lead with what Harris and Walz say and then say, oh, by the way, JD Vance said this. And it's striking. It is striking that beyond all the character flaws of JD Vance, beyond all the flaws I would have with him in terms of his position on policies, the entire Trump campaign approach for a campaign which was devious, manipulative, but succeeded in 2016, it's been absolutely cack-handed in the past month. Maybe the key point why Walz was eventually named over all the other challengers, and the Democrats had a lot of talent for this position, is that he got along well with Kamala Harris. And he got along well with Kamala Harris because he was making the argument, I'm not here to outshine you. I'm not here to be the next president. I'm here to be supportive. And I think that rang well with Harris, who was put in the shadows by Joe Biden. But I think it also it rang well in a wider sense. This election, in part, is about the future of the American system. It's about the future of democracy. And in that sense, Walz supporting Harris in the idea that we are here to serve the people. We are not here to pursue personal gain by persuading or even manipulating the people. That's almost as powerful a juxtaposition with Trump as the prosecutor versus convicted felon line will be.